Good evening, everyone. Actually, as you see, that the title of our panel is about the urban development of Jerusalem during the Ottoman period. As maybe all of you knows that the Ottoman rule of Jerusalem lasts for 400 years, from 1517 into 1970s. This is actually a very long period, and according to all urban historians, we are divided into two main periods. The first one, during 16th and 17th, it was affected by the traditional types of urban developments. The second period, 18th and 19th century, it was more influenced by westernization, both in architectural style and urban development. That's why we thought that it would be better to organize it in a panel format. I will talk about the first 2 centuries, and my colleague, Dr. Lana, she will continue with the late developments and arriving to the current condition of this Ottoman heritage and the potentials of its conservation. Actually, in the context of the Ottoman urban studies, whenever we are dealing with the provincial towns, we have to deal with the term of Ottomanization. This term is a recent one. Actually, Irene Berman, in the 80s of the last century, she was one of the first scholars who used this terminology while she was studying the transformation of the cities in the island of Igrit in the mid of 17th century, and how they transformed from Christian cities into Muslim cities under the Ottoman rules. And after that, this terminology was used by many scholars with the welfare of new studies. There is this French school in the Bilad al-Sham, like Jean-Claude David and André Raymond. Also some other researchers in Cairo. They were also investigating how these Mamluk cities, they were transformed into into Ottoman cities. And also with additional studies of Çiğdem Kafesçioğlu, Golü Naciboğlu. They are very famous Turkish researchers. They were making some investigation into the Ottoman archives and the Sharia court sigils, and to trace how the practice of architecture was going on during the classical Ottoman period. All these studies, they are giving us a very good resources in order to start or to have traces for this Ottomanization for any a new provincial city. Actually, it's from all these studies we can see that this Ottomanization, it was not a one-sided process. It was different from one city to city according to the social and economical facts of each city. However, despite these differences, there are always some traces or main components that we can define, especially when we're making some comparisons. And for this sake, I will take the two main urban centers in Bilad al-Sham, Aleppo and Damascus, as case studies for comparison. This is to help us to put Jerusalem into the regional and imperial context. The structure of my presentation will start with a very, very brief introduction into the Mamluk urban legacy in the late 15th century. I mean the period exactly before the Ottoman entered the city. After that, the process of Ottomanization, I defined 5 main points for discussion. First, the first Ottoman interventions to put the Ottoman signs on the city. Second, Sultan Suleiman and his major projects in the Jerusalem. The third is the main complexes in the 16th, 17th century. Then I will talk about the changes in urban fabric, and finally about the changes in architectural style. And as a conclusion, I will just conclude with some remarks which makes the case study of Jerusalem special. During the Mamluk period, you know that Jerusalem, it had a central location within the Mamluk state, which encompass Egypt, Bilad al-Sham, and the western sea coast of the Red Sea. And here we should also pay attention to one point, that for the Mamluks, they fought a lot for Jerusalem. That's why it has very symbolic position in their affections. They have these long jihad to take it from the Crusaders and take it back into this Islamic realm. That's why they paid so much attention, and they started a very huge building campaign in the city. In the first Mamluk period, it was allocated until the province, under the province of Syria, of Damascus. That's why many of the inscriptions, like dated back to the 13th and the first half of the 14th century. Pardon, is it possible to continue with this? There is a child here. It's a little bit like distracting. I'm sorry.
He doesn't understand.
Yes, I know. Many of the inscription, we see the names of the governors of Damascus. Like one special case study is the Prince Tankez al-Nasiri. He had many building campaigns in Jerusalem. However, in the second half of the 14th century, the city was upgraded into a province, and the governor of Jerusalem was appointed directly from the capital, Cairo. The buildings of Mamluk, they were very different types. There were many madrasas and very some guest houses in order to receive pilgrimage and the students. Also, in addition to some markets and commercial facilities to encourage the commercial life inside the city, and of course sebis and fountains. In addition to the new buildings, there were many restoration of the older structures from Ayyubid and early Muslim periods, especially under the Sultan Kalawun and Sultan Kaytabay. In regard of the architecture style, of course, for all the architects now, there is very special school of Mamluk architecture. They were very distinguished by using very rich decorations, using this stone as a building material, and using this polychrome we called in Arabic Nizam al-Ablaq, which is alternative courses of colored stones, maybe black basalt, white limestone, and maybe pink or yellow limestone. And these were very special features. And according to Michael Manke, who studied the Mamluk architecture in Egypt and Syria, he recognized two main schools. One was centered in Aleppo, the other was in Cairo, and he noticed that in Jerusalem they were following the traditions of Aleppo school. Maybe this is because of the similarities in building materials, using limestone as a main building material. Here also you can find some examples of the main Mamluk buildings all through the city. Now we are coming to 1516. Actually, the Battle of Marjdabek to the north of Aleppo, it was a very important battle because it signaled that to integrate the whole Mamluk realm under the Ottoman rule. One political consequence, very important after this battle, that the Ottoman sultans, they inherited the position of Mamluk sultans as the custodians of Khidmat al-Haramain al-Sharifain. Also Sultan Salim, he removed all these holy relics from Cairo into Istanbul in order to enhance this position as the new capital of the Islamic rule. Also another point that with the Mamluk cities, or the cities that they were part of the Mamluk Empire, there is a difference from the other cities of the Balkan area or even Istanbul, because in the first case they were Christian cities. So the challenge was to produce a wholly new system, Islamize these cities, introducing mosques and the other types of religious architecture. But in the provincial cities of Bilad al-Sham and Egypt, they are already been in Ard al-Islam for more than 700 years. That's why the challenge was to Ottomanize, not to Islamize, and to integrate the city into new administrative system. Sultan Salim, he entered Jerusalem on the 30th of December in 1560s, and he celebrated this victory in the Haram al-Sharif. However, he didn't leave any architecture or urban trace. And actually, in fact, with one acceptance, his complex in Damascus, where he renovated the tomb of Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, the Sufi sheikh, and he constructed his taqiyya beside this tomb, he didn't leave any trace in Bilad al-Sham. And this was because Ottoman sultans, they were like busy with two wars, like one in the Balkan, the other in the Safawi Empire. That's why they didn't pay attention to the buildings. It was until Sultan Suleiman came, he started like to make some architectural and urban projects in this territory. Suleiman's early interventions in Jerusalem, actually it was also one part of a huge project. He tried to make like some system in each city just to make very modest intervention, but just like to make a connection, to connect all these cities together and to connect these cities to the capital in Istanbul. Generally, the main characteristic of these early interventions that Ottoman, they were choosing very symbolic site, either symbolic or topographically very visible site, and to construct one implement, just to make this Ottoman image or Ottoman stamp on the city. Here I will mention some examples. For example, in Cairo, the first Ottoman mosque, it was constructed by the governor Suleyman Pasha al-Khadim in 1528. He chose the location of the citadel, which is overlooking the city. And here you can see, although the mosque is very modest as a structure, it is characterized with a high, Ottoman minaret with this rounded shaft and conical end, very characteristic of Ottoman style. For example, in Aleppo, it was less dramatic. The citadel, also the highest point in the city, it was taken over by Sultan Suleiman. So it was now a new territory, departed detached from the city. After that, he chose to build one tower to the western side of the gate, the one which with a circle. And at the top of this tower, there is one inscription in Arabic commemorating for Sultan Suleiman. Actually, the location is very important here because this inscription and this tower, it was overlooking one of the biggest squares just in the front of the citadel. It was the Mamluk Maidan. So in this case, it ensures its maximum visibility of such an inscription. Coming back now to Jerusalem, when we are charting the Ottoman interventions, the first two interventions, they were the first one at the tomb of Prophet David on the Zion mountain, extramural. Also, it's at the height of this Zion mountain. And the second was in the citadel. The first case, the site of tomb Prophet David, this is very symbolically in charge site because it's very important for Christians, Muslims, and Jewish. And there were actually many interventions and maybe many problems according to the ownership rights. So Sultan Suleiman, first he took over this site. After that he made some restoration. Then he transformed the room of the Last Supper into a small mosque. And later in 1530, the Franciscans who were taking care of this sanctuary, they were relocated into another site inside the city, intramural. When we are investigating a little bit this mosque, we will see that it's a very, very modest one, but it is characterized by a small minaret. This minaret also, it has very modest scales, but again, it is according to the Ottoman style. It has this rounded shaft and this balcony, dependent on Mukarnas, subliments. And you can see here that even with the many later interventions and buildings, we can still recognize this Ottoman minaret. So also it was a stamp from one side to enhance the Islamic character of the city, and from the other side to put the stamp of the new rule. The second side was the citadel. Here also, especially when we know that the citadel was not in a ruin condition. It has been recently built by Al-Nasser Muhammad in the early 14th century, and it was served as a military location for Mamluk until the last dates. So there was no need for restoration. But again, Sultan Suleiman, he came, he started some restoration works, and by the end of these restoration works, he also constructed one mosque with this rounded minaret. And as you can see from these photos, until now, it's predominant in the city landscape of the city. Okay, this is about the first Ottoman signs. Now we are coming to the main projects of Sultan Süleyman. After putting his Ottoman presence in the city, he started a very big urban project in order to enhance, to preserve and fortify the city. And here we can understand 2 points. From one side, this was a responsibility of Ottoman, because this is to legitimize their rule as they are serving these Haram Sharif locations. But also from the other side, this is related to personality of Sultan Süleyman. We know that he started a very big building campaign all through the empire, and he was very important architectural patron, especially with his main architect Mimar Sinan. For example, in order just to put his projects in Jerusalem within the context, we can say that, for example, in Baghdad, he renovated the tomb of Abu Hanifa, the founder of the Hanafi madhab, who is the official madhab or sect of the Ottoman Empire. In Konya, he renovated the tomb of Jalaluddin Rumi. In Mecca and Medina, he was making some restoration works in Kaaba. He was building 4 madrasas for the first Islamic madhabs. In Medina, he also renovated the mosque of the Prophet, and he was also building city walls around the Medina. Coming back to Jerusalem, actually he had many, his rule, his works extend to a span of nearly 50 years. That's why it's very hard to mention all the works, and there were many researches and studied really in details about every work and in which year and all the circumstances. But here what is important just to classify the main projects. The first one was in the Haram al-Sharif area. And here, because for many students and many Muslims, there is this misunderstanding. They consider when we say Haram al-Sharif or Masjid al-Aqsa only the Dome of the Rock. But no, this is the Dome of the Rock plus Masjid al-Aqsa plus hundreds, or let's say not hundreds, tens of smaller structures. They are distributed around these 2 main sanctuary in 2 platforms, the higher and the lower. This is a very general view to the whole Haram Sharif area, and it covers about 150,000 square meters. In the Haram Sharif, he had many restoration works for about 40 years, but the most important for us is the completely recovering the external surfaces of the Dome of the Rock with these ceramic tiles. Here there is a symbolism, especially when we know that in the historic resources we don't have any information that saying that the older ceramic tiles from the Umayyad period, they were so much ruined that there is a need to replace all these. And also when we know that on the internal surfaces, restoration were not so much deep. They were only superficial. That's why we can understand there were some intention for this completely recovering the surfaces of the Dome of the Rock in order to emphasize the new rule. Why? Because these elements, they were completely foreign to the context, local context of the city. So with anyone, either the local inhabitants or pilgrimage or student coming, he will recognize from the first sight that there is a new Islamic rule here. Here also one very important point that later researchers were done to compare these ceramic tiles that were used in the Dome of the Rock and also in Sultan Süleyman complex in Damascus. They discovered many similarities, the thickness of these tiles and the final surfaces, glazing surfaces. That's why there were assumptions that the craftsmen who worked in the Dome of the Rock, after that, maybe they were also sent to Damascus in order to work on the complex of the Sultan there, and they established another workshops in Damascus, and they started the whole project that have been promoted by the governors there. The second biggest project was the city wall. Until now, whenever when we are approaching Jerusalem, the first magnificent landscape, we can recognize it within these city walls. City walls, it's like different from the citadel. They were in ruin because the Ayyubid prince Muazzam Isa, he completely like destroyed them in the 13th century in order like to prevent their use by the Christian army. Therefore, there was really an urgent need to rebuild the city, especially that Jerusalem and another Palestinian city, they were always under the threat of the Bedouin like attacks to the like inhabitants of the city. The wall enclosure actually, to a great extent, it's followed the previous like topographical location of the walls, and they were like pierced with several gates, which also like responded to the previous gates even from the Roman times. And although like some researchers say that this was not only to protect Jerusalem from Bedouin, also to protect them from any possible Crusader attack, other researchers say no, because they were very low and they cannot handle like a full army with a full bombardment. That's why they said the like main reason was for inner or domestic secure of the city. In this also, if we want to put this project into this regional and imperial context, we should notice that generally, like surrounding a complete city with the wall, it's not very like general or popular in the Ottoman urban projects. We only have like very few examples. That's why this can also help us to symbolize this project, like especially when we remember that in the same time Suleiman, he was he was constructing a new city walls for Medina. So when we put this in the same context, and to remember that Istanbul, Constantinople, it was one of the medieval cities very famous of their Byzantine city walls, maybe this was like motivation for Suleiman in order to imitate these great works of medieval empires. Here you can see some photos of these main gates, and also it's like very important to notice the similarities. They were not very new in the architecture style. They like reproduce many Ayyubid and Mamluk details in military like architecture. The third main work was like to provide Jerusalem with the water. This was one of the main challenges of all the rulers of the city. That's why Suleiman, he restored the aqueduct to bring water from Suleiman's pools near Beit Lahem. He repaired all these canals, and after that bring water to Sultan's pool close to Mount Zion. It's a very big reservoir, as you can see from the photo. And after that, like a new canalization system, go into the city, inside the walls and the Haram al-Sharif, and like a series of sabils were founded in the 16th century. The third component of Ottomanization was through the main complexes in 16th and 17th century, and this was mainly in order to enhance the religious character of the city. And in fact, here we should also remember that the taqiyya or imaret, it was not known during the Mamluk period. It was like a new type of charitable buildings introduced by Ottomans. As I mentioned before, the first example was the complex of Sultan Salim. After that, they start to establish Sultan Suleiman complex in Jerusalem. And here, it was like one of the main complexes, Hurrem Sultan or Haseki Sultan, or as they called in Palestine, Al-Amar Al-Amira, which is until now in function. This like complex, it was like taking a very important sign to the west of the Haram al-Sharif. And here it's important also to notice that the location was symbolic because it was also associated with female donors in the city. The first was this Constantine's mother, Queen Helena, who built the hospice on this site. After that, from Mamluk period, there was Lady Tunshuk al-Muzaffariya. She also like built one sarai and one guest house for pilgrimage. And after she died, she has her tomb there. So Hurrem Sultan, when she like chose this location, she incorporated all these like remains of these previous structures into one main complex. And actually association with these symbolic sites, this is also not a new strategy in the Ottoman period. We can find many examples in Damascus. We have this Muhyiddin ibn Arabi tomb. It was converted into complex. Also Suleiman, when he established his taqiyya, it was on the site of the Sarai of Zahir Baybars, Sultan Zahir Baybars, the Mamluk Sultan. And in Aleppo, the same thing. The first Ottoman complexes, they were always associated with the Mamluk squares or these polo training squares in the city. That's why, it was the same strategy was followed in Jerusalem. And first of all, the remains of this Settonshuk, the Mamluk Settonshuk, it was converted into guest house. After that, Haseki Hurrem Sultan, she added a mosque, hospice, and a ham. After that, also this complex was extended in order to incorporate another complex from 16th century, Amir Bayram Jawish, Rabat. It was also incorporated. After that, another madrasa from the Mamluk period, Madrasa Mawardiya, and they still extended to constitute the largest Ottoman complex in the classical period. The fourth point is about the functions of the urban fabric. Actually, apart these projects, what we mentioned, if we are studying the cardinals and the main functions of the city, we can notice that there were no main changes. The markets, they still in their places, the seat of administration, the courts, everything stayed the same. However, there were very small foundations, by local families and local patrons, and also they paid so much attention to the restoration of the previous structure from previous ruling times. And this modest scale of urban changes, when we are looking this from external or superficially, this made many researchers declare that these Ottomans didn't pay very big attention to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem lost this very special place that it interested during the Ottoman period. However, when we are studying the realities of the city, we can find there were many reasons for this. I can summarize these realities under three main topics. The first, the socio-economic conditions of the city. Secondly, the availability of spaces for new buildings. And third, the type of patronage in these 2 centuries. For socio-economic condition, here you can find just small number, a few numbers just to put in the context between Jerusalem and the main centers of Aleppo and Damascus. In the mid-16th century, Damascus 57,000 inhabitants population, Jerusalem only 4,000. In the early 19th century, Aleppo 250,000, Jerusalem only 18th. Moreover, both Damascus and Aleppo, they were centers of international and regional commercial activities, but Jerusalem, they were only local activity, and this local activity couldn't compete with these international and regional. That's why there was no reason for big building campaigns in the city. The second reason was the opportunities of new structures. As we mentioned before, Mamluk, they started very big building campaigns. They established many buildings around the Haram al-Sharif, the vicinity, and the intramural. That's why, in fact, there was no space for new establishments or big complexes. Maybe some researchers can debate or argue that in Damascus and Aleppo, there were some transformation of older Mamluk sites into Ottoman sites, but always there was a reason, very need, urgent, functional need, and also this was to a certain degree. For example, in Aleppo, you can see here that the main complexes of the 16th century, all of them, they were focused on the commercial center in order to create this center to serve the international trade. However, André Raymond, he noticed that when we are approaching the end of the 16th century, all these complexes tend to be smaller in size. Moreover, the last one, the complex of Bahram Basha, he established one core in the center, but the other core was in a new neighborhood, extramural. In Damascus, it was the same. The whole complexes of the governors, they were extramural. However, in Jerusalem, it was difficult. As we mentioned, it was difficult to extend outside the walls because of the security reasons. It was very difficult to find places for new establishments. The last one, the type of patronage. Actually, the studies show that always we have to distinguish between two main types, the royal patronage and the local patronage. In the 16th century, the royal patronage, which was initiated by the royal family, sultans and their relatives, or the governors who were directly appointed from the capital, they were more influential. They have more wealth, they have more power in order to acquire all these properties and convert it into waqfs. But for local patrons, this was not possible. And in Jerusalem, it was different from Aleppo and Damascus because in these two cities they were capitals of provinces. That's why the governors were appointed directly from the capital, Istanbul. But in Jerusalem, the Ottomans, in order to secure the pilgrimage and the trade routes, they tend to give the Sanjak Bey of Jerusalem into local family, as a tax farm, and because they have these good relations with the Bedouin tribes. That's why these local family, they couldn't initiate very big projects in the city during 16th and 17th century. The last point is the changes in architectural style. Here also, according to many studies, they were welfare of studies about the Ottoman architecture in Jerusalem. All the researchers, they noticed that there were no radical changes in the Ottoman styles. Ottoman, they continue to use the main visual language of the Mamluks, all these decorations, the same building materials, building techniques. Even some evidence from Sharia sigils, they found that there were some local families, they worked in architecture even for 5 generations. For example, Ailat ibn Nammar family, they were very famous, and they even handled some projects in Damascus and Aleppo. This also was another reason for some researchers to also to focus that Jerusalem, it was neglected by Ottomans. They didn't pay attention. They didn't put so much this central architectural style input. But again, when we are putting this in the context of the scale of the urban and architectural activity in the city, we can find this is a very reasonable. And also not to also forget that even when we are comparing, here I put you some photos. This some examples from Jerusalem. Here you can find some examples from Damascus, and here some examples from Aleppo. You can see the similarities that Ottoman, regardless of Jerusalem, in all these provincial cities, there were some intendant. They wanted to keep these visual language of the cities unaltered, and this was maybe their perception of the image, Ottoman image of the city, that we can leave the previous expressions to live together with the new expression of the new rule. Finally, after all these very brief introduction into these interventions, we can conclude with some remarks. The study of the Ottoman intervention on the urban fabric of Jerusalem during the classical period showed that this Ottomanization of the city was highly flexible process. It tended to coexist and enhance what is there rather than to change or erase these traces. Sultan Süleyman's early interventions were part of a broader project of marking provincial cities. They were very modest signs, but they were intended in order to bind those cities to each other and to the Ottoman rule. The establishment of the Ottoman image of Jerusalem was mainly through the work of as we mentioned, royal patronage. It was the most influential during the first 2 centuries. And in fact, Sultan Süleyman, after all these interventions in the city, it was associated with the memory of King Solomon, the first builder of Jerusalem. The Ottoman royal patronage, actually, it was a little bit different from the Mamluk patronage in mainly 2 points. The first was that These like the widest span of the project, and like they are realized in a very short span in time, leads to the belief that they were carried according to a set plan, contrary to the approach of Mamluks, which was based on individual initiative. Secondly, the projects were very high-profile enterprises. They were aimed at society at large, the whole inhabitants of the city, rather than a small segment of it. Finally, the local patronage, on the other side, contributed to the maintenance and restoration of the urban fabric of Jerusalem, and all in all, the Ottoman patronage shows how seriously the Ottoman sultans took their obligations as guardians of the major Islamic shrines. Visual culture, including the architecture style, was indeed an essential tool of Ottomanization. The Ottomans tended to appropriate style from different periods of the past and to display them combined with their classical Ottoman style. And this was ultimately the image of the Ottoman city, a city that local traditions were allowed to coexist with the new ones. And thank you. Now we can...
Maybe I don't need this microphone, you can hear me. So now, after we heard about the development of the Jerusalem city during the 16th century, now we are going to see what has happening in this second period, since we just heard actually that from Dr. Ruba that it is important to distinguish these two quite different period in terms of speaking about urban development of the city, which was happening in the very beginning under the Ottomans, and the changes that occurred later with the 19th century. So I will briefly pass through these changes, and after all I will try to just introduce you to the current circumstances under which we are actually dealing today with the heritage, with the cultural heritage, and specifically with the Ottoman heritage of the old city of Jerusalem. So in terms of speaking generally about the preservation of the heritage, we have to, of course, take into consideration all the facts that were very important for the development of such a valuable asset. As we know, Jerusalem is a holy site for three monotheistic religions, and taking all this into as very important fact, we can distinguish Ottoman period not just because it was for the 4 centuries, but also because of these two different periods, which we are when we are talking about 16th centuries in kind of traditional manner, when we are talking about the urban development, and the changes with the 19th century that are reflect in a way of shaping the city in quite westernized manner under some let me say European influence. So knowing that in the 16th centuries, not to repeat, of course we just heard more details about, but we have to just go very briefly to remind that there was very important projects of the Sultan Suleiman as the most, let me say, most important or most significant, rather, to say, city walls, water system, and also interventions of the Haram al-Sharif. Also, there were very important structures as endowment, and one of the biggest is that we heard also about Haseki Hurrem Sultan and the Soul Kitchen for the poor people. Very important structures in this period were also water fountains and also a policy of appropriation to the Islamic community of various shrines that were located out of the city wall. Here on this photo you can see one of the example, and also for the, so all these facts, they were important in terms of how the Ottomans were contributing for the urban development of the old city, and for in terms of speaking how they were enhancing the wealth of the domestic population. So one of the examples is that they reopen, or let me say they tried to establish a better function for the existing markets. So therefore they developed spice market, cotton market, and vegetables. In this term it was possible to have better economy, better domestic production, and here you can see example of Souk al-Katanin, or the cotton market. From the 16th period, there was of course many other projects very important as a contribution, but in terms of speaking about urban development, here on this map we can see how the city was looking in this period, in the beginning of the Ottoman period. And if we look more into detail, we can still find the traces of Roman street cardon decumanus that were going from the Damascus gate and from the Jaffa gate. And it was a kind of very basic division of the old city into 4 quarters. But you have to know that this division into 4 quarters is quite different from what today we know as Jewish, Muslim, or Christian or Armenian Christian quarter. I don't know, like if you are not introduced to this, I will just briefly show. But I think the light is very. If you don't know, so this part belongs to the Armenian Christians, upper part is the Christian quarter, this quarter is Jewish, and the upper part, right up, is the Muslim quarter of the old city. In terms of speaking, what is the difference between what is why we call it today as these 4 quarters and what was before? Actually, in 16th century, it was in each of these quarter matrix of mahallas. So the people were rather gathered according to their origin, according to their tribes, and some common features, and they were gathered around some of their religious buildings, and they were in smaller groups. But today it is almost like, let me say, exclusively. But what we today can notice that, for instance, in Muslim quarter you can find the Christian monuments, or and vice versa. In the Christian part you can find other religious monuments, and in each of these quarters. So therefore it was quite different from what we know today. And in terms of speaking, what will happen in 17th and 18th centuries, there was no kind of monumental structures built, but of course there were very important interventions for the restoration, for the contribution of the preservation of Haram al-Sharif, of Al-Aqsa, and the Dome of the Rock. And then we are jumping to the 19th centuries as something quite different in terms of speaking about the urban development of the old city and of the city of Jerusalem itself. Since, first of all, we can say that the condition inside the old city was quite overpopulated city. There was lack of available spaces and also the sanitation problems. So the people were trying to find what was affordable or what was a suitable area to settle, and therefore with the enhancement of the security, with the presence of military out of the city wall, it was possible to consider area out of the city wall for the expansion of the neighborhoods. So this will happen with the 19th century, and city will gain much larger area, and I will show some of the maps to see how much it was expanded. So the 19th century, in terms of speaking about how much changed the architectural structures were, here on this photo we can see Hotel Imperial that is just next to the Jaffa Gate, And as you can notice in terms of shaping or treatment of the facade, in terms of shaping openings, this is quite different from what was existing before and that we might call a traditional way of shaping. So this is something quite modernized, and this was appearing in city of Jerusalem for the first time with the 19th century. So the city, with all this influence from West, it will gain a new character, and of course today when we see the city of Jerusalem, we see also both of these remain of the history, which is more traditional way of shaping the structure, and something what came with the 19th century. So in this term, since also with the 19th century, the non-Ottoman inhabitants, they were also allowed to own the land and to own the properties. Therefore, European Christian groups, they increased their also activities, also construction activities, and not just out of the city wall, but also inside. Here we have one of the example, Muristan area inside the old city in the Christian quarter, and as you can see, it's quite different from the traditional houses and the structures, but not just when we are talking about buildings, but also open public space, which is quite different from this for this area. And usually these structures now, since they were bringing this influence from the Europe, they were built in kind of neo-Renaissance, neo-Baroque manner, etc. Here I also selected some of the examples in terms of speaking about how different now approach to the urban development and how new architectural style was during the 19th century inside the Jerusalem. So, as I mentioned, different Christian groups, they increased their activities, and on this left photos, you can see the Russian church close to the Holy Sepulchre, and it is quite modern building. After that, you can see example of the German colony, since with the second part of the 19th century, there were many neighborhoods out of the city walls, and in terms of speaking about organized and planned neighborhood, German was among the first. As you can see in this urban pattern down on this mid photo. And also we can find a kind of traditional way of shaping houses, especially for Arab population. And later on, with the second part of the 19th century, of course, they were also applying, influenced by others, they were also applying some new architectural elements, which you can see on this photo in terms of shaping or applying them above the openings, above the windows and doors. So when we are talking about expansion of the city out of the wall, before 19th century, we can find out of the wall some of the mosques, Zavia, and other buildings since the Ayyubi period. But with the 19th, they lost most of their prosperity. And what was also built out of the city wall, it was cemeteries and also the summer houses, walled summer houses, kasr or kusur. Is it Arabic? Yes, kasr. Yes, so they were built mostly by the let me say, nobility family from inside the city who were spending their summer out of the city wall, and these were a few examples we can say. And later on, around this castle, the families were expanding. They were expanding their properties, and therefore this kind of neighborhoods are a bit different from what we just saw in previous slide in terms of speaking about planned and organized neighborhood. And for the expansion of the planned neighborhood for the Arab population, we have a lack of sources. So we might think that they started their construction a bit later comparing to Jewish population and the Christians, but actually with these examples that I have just mentioned, we can see that these houses and neighborhood were existing, and also I will show on the map. Here on these two photos we see view toward the old city, and actually we can see the presence of the some structures out of the city wall. Also it is important to mention some of the villages that were existing there. Maybe here it is the best to show, for instance, village of Silvan. It is right here. Village of Silvan and for instance Altur village, they are confirming that it was possible even without being surrounded with the walls to live out of the city in terms of the security. So when we are mentioning the first neighborhood that started to be built out of the city wall with the 19th century, for the here on this map you can see on the northern part several castles, as the structures, as I mentioned, being constructed since the 15th century, and later with the 19th the houses were expanded around. So among the first on the northern part you can see El Masadia, then you can see Wadi al-Joz, Sheikh Jara or Husseini Quarter. So these are some of the examples of the first Arab neighborhoods out of the city wall, and later on, of course, we have more, but if we are mentioning just Arab neighborhoods, but also we can, as I mentioned, also the Christian group, they were constructing their neighborhoods, also the Jewish population they were constructing, and at the end of the 19th century, here on this map you can see how much actually the municipality itself was expanded. And this is the aerial photo showing us precisely that the urban fabric was quite developed also out of the city walls. In terms of constructing these new buildings, also as I was explaining what was happening in terms of applying new style inside the old city, also out of the city walls, totally new type of style was applied. For instance, here you can see the church with the something what was unknown before for the city of Jerusalem, or this is Santa Augusta, or this is on the right photo you can see the first Jewish also neighborhood built in the vicinity of the old city. And in terms of speaking how important 19th century was for the urban development, we have to mention that for the first time there was a telegraph, there was the Jerusalem city was connected also with the Jaffa by the train. Then we have the gravel pavement. This photo is showing us the Jaffa street, and as you can see, this street leads us toward the old city, and therefore we can, and here some of the structures to the left corner, you can see some of the structures also built by some other European groups. So this was with the 19th century, we can say this was a mix of different styles applied inside the city of Jerusalem, inside the wall and out of the wall. And now, in order to understand how we can deal, now we have a kind of figure about what happened with the 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th century. Now I will try just to briefly explain the current condition and all the, let me say, factors that are very important if we want to deal with the heritage preservation today. Old city and Jerusalem itself, after the Ottomans, they came under the British mandate, and in this period it's important to mention that several master plans was developed in this period, and they have all clear goal to preserve the old city. In that term, we have to say that they also inherited some legislation that were adopted already and established with the Ottomans, but they were just kind of enhancement, and they defined better, or let me say more deeply. They went into detail by prohibiting any construction in the vicinity of the old city. They were also prohibiting buildings to be higher than a city walls, etc. Also in this period we have increased immigration of Jewish population toward the Jerusalem, and therefore also in this period city was developed. City continued its development, and on the map you can follow a different period and different years, and you can see how starting from the very small area that is old city, which covered actually around 1 square kilometer inside the city walls, and what we have actually today. But of course we have to understand that after the British mandate, Jerusalem was divided city in 1948 when it was divided to the western part under Jewish or under Israeli control, and eastern part with the old city, it was under Jordanian control. So in the both sides we have parallel administrative units without any collaboration, and also in that period the especially western part of the city was much enlarged. And regarding old city, the condition was not very well in terms of the sanitation. Therefore, people were also going out and expanding their neighborhood out of the city wall in the eastern part of Jerusalem. Also, some of the old photos showing us expanded area. And with the 1967, Israeli annexed East Jerusalem and Old City. And immediately after annexation, they brought a decision. This is one of the example. They brought decision to build a big plaza in front of Al Burak Wall for the Jewish population to pray in front of or Wailing Wall, and therefore they decided to demolish one of the old neighborhood that was there. And in this map, you can see here what was the area populated by the Jewish. Before, and what was today actually condition of the what is today condition of the Jewish quarter, how much enlarged. So it was after building this plaza, also this Maghribian Moroccan old neighborhood was demolished, and with the this area is we can say exclusively inhabited with the Jewish population. Actually, during the Ottoman period, Jewish were living in quite distance from the Al Burak Wall, since it was forbidden for others to be in close vicinity of the Haram al-Sharif. And this photo show us and some others that structures were much closer to the Wailing Wall or Al Burak Wall, and while creating this new plaza for praying, of course, all these structures were demolished and razed. Also, some other photo showing us this condition prior to development of the Jewish quarter in what we know today. On this photo, you can see what happened later with the reconstruction. And actually, it's difficult to see reconstruction. This is a construction of the new buildings inside this Jewish quarter with quite new style that is different from what was traditionally there existing. And also they increased the floor elevations. And with the 80s, also Israeli started with the to make to make some new houses or settlements in the eastern Jerusalem, but also in the Muslim quarter and Christian. So we can say they start to Judaize the Islamic and Christian quarter. With the 20th and 21st century, important facts are just to mention. With the 93. East Jerusalem was not able anymore to function as a capital of the West Bank. It was detached, and especially later with the here on this photo you can see the separation wall. Separation wall actually divided city again. It is not just today we know it is a physical barrier, but it is also the mental barrier between divided society. And so today East Jerusalem is totally detached from the West Bank. And on this map you can see also the checkpoints and how some of the part of the this separation wall is actually dividing the same Palestinian neighborhood into two parts. But in terms of why I'm mentioning also the division wall and also or separation wall and also new settlements that are built by the Israeli in the East Jerusalem, because they have also negative impact in visual term of valuable asset of the old city. And then, in terms of speaking about heritage preservation, we have to take into account also the old legislation, and we have to understand the legal framework, and we have to know who are the stakeholders that are involved in the heritage preservation issue. Therefore, I will mention some of the legislation, which is, for instance, autonomy over the administration for the holy sites. This was established by the Ottomans and later was followed by British and Jordanian mandate. And according to this, Haram al-Sharif is claimed by the Waqf administration. Also important is to mention protection law for the protection of the holy places. So the holy places are protected from violation, and by this law we have a freedom of access to the holy places. And there is antiquity law also that determines that all what is newly discovered archaeological remains, it is ownership of Israeli. But we can say it's difficult to speak about what can be newly discovered the archaeological remains, since we know that Jerusalem itself, it is the multi-layered city since through all this period of historical periods. It's difficult to say that we cannot find some new archaeological remains. Of course, there will be many, and in this term we can say that by the Palestinians, none of the archaeological excavation has been done since the British mandate. Also, it is important to understand that there is a complex situation in terms of speaking about the different type of ownership, and it can be private, Waqf properties, municipal, state, and disputed properties. And according to this map, actually the Waqf is the larger ownership in the old city of Jerusalem. And according to its outstanding universal value, the UNESCO, actually the Jerusalem has been inscribed on the World Heritage List of the UNESCO since 81, and since 82 it is inscribed on the list in the World Heritage List endangered. And all over these years, UNESCO is reporting about threats and about what is the risk for the cultural heritage of the old city and its walls. Of course, all this here you can see, I mentioned some of them. All these threats are in the same time threats for the Ottoman heritage. And the most important action of the UNESCO was the preparation of the action plan. But we have to say that they have many also critics for this action plan, since they were not mentioning some of the very important questions, such as the question of ownership. They didn't include these political questions, and since Jerusalem is quite complicated in these administrative terms, so it was very important to mention, but since, of course, as we know, for Jerusalem there is no common solution yet. And also, we can mention for the UNESCO, there is also recently resolution, even also a few days ago on TV, maybe if somebody is following, there was resolution, one more resolution brought by UNESCO, but in the same time these resolutions are criticized from the Israeli side, because in last year they were mentioning all the holy sites by its Muslim names, and there is always, as I said, like one side is not satisfied with all these documents. And now, like speaking about the urban fabric, as we now try to understand what's happening with the 16th century and later with up to 19th centuries. And today we are trying to have some more action on the preservation of this valuable asset. And we can say that according to its very valuable structures, this is a very unique city, and we have to have some really very well prepared the plans, and many organizations and we're dealing with. But in the same time, there is always lack of the kind of integrated approach that will integrate the research and also the field work and implementation. But in terms of speaking, what is the current condition? Here I have data from this survey that was done from 1999, and this was published in 2004 by the for the revitalization plan of Jerusalem by the welfare organization, and according to this survey, excluding Jewish quarter, the physical state of building is worse than the structural conditions. But we have to notice that according to the also visual inspection and according to this plan, there is always question of ownership, accessibility, maintenance, usage, upgrades. So in this term, all the structures are suffering from these questions. Most of the actions, they are focused on the preservation of, let me say, some religious buildings, mosque, or some schools, etc. But when it comes in the question about how to preserve just houses, there is always some of the actions that have negative impact on these also valuable assets, which is, for instance, inappropriate usage, lack of maintenance, or, for instance, sometimes people, since they don't have enough suitable a place for the expansion of their houses, so they are expanding it in their way. They are adding some additional floor elevation. They are using also, in order to adopt their houses for the contemporary way of life, they are using infrastructural system but without technical guidance. So all these facts actually have negative impact, and we have a negative outcome for the old city of Jerusalem and as a valuable asset. And then in terms of speaking about some of the Ottoman buildings, here I can show just briefly some of the examples. This is because we heard already about the complex where we have Madrasa Mavardiya and Haseki Sultan complex. But for these buildings, we here on first photo you can see condition from 98. Then restoration was done in 2004, and this last photo is condition in 2015. As we can notice, again, there is a lack of proper maintenance, and here you can see also the inside the similar situation with the appearance of this graffiti, for instance, or sometimes also in terms of lack of maintenance, we have greenery appeared, or inside also humidity appeared, and therefore it's again quite difficult to use this in term it should be used. Or also there is now need to clean the facade stone. Other example is Naqshbandiya. Yes. So here you can see the let me say approximately the same corner from which the photo was taken. This first photo is from Abdul Hamid collection, and then here you can see the condition of this building from 2015. Again, problem with the installation, with the also problem with the lack of maintenance, and also maybe here in this photo it's difficult to notice, but there is cracks appeared above these openings. So, but also for these buildings, I have to mention that during this period there was no survey and proper survey, but also during 80s inside the buildings there was several destruction, and some of the very valuable spaces were totally demolished. So now we are maybe speaking only about the facade as the most valuable part. And in terms of, as I mentioned, like in terms of speaking about how we have to prepare future action, we have to integrate several aspects. We have to integrate education, research, we have to raise awareness, and we have to promote City of Jerusalem. But all these questions are always quite difficult for this complicated asset. And in terms of speaking how to integrate and how to make more effort for the education, I will just show, for instance, our example of summer school that we have done with the local partner, International Peace and Cooperation Center from Jerusalem. Our students were dealing with real problems with some locations that are just in the quite vicinity of the old city, such as the example of Jabal al-Mukaber and Wadi al-Joz. If you now can remember, I was mentioning Wadi al-Joz as one of the first neighborhood out of the city wall. So for here we were preparing some projects in regard to support the tourism activities for the old city of Jerusalem, since there is lack of some of the spaces, so our students were giving some of the proposal, and also we were dealing with some other Ottoman structures out of the Jerusalem, and this is the area of chiefly Turkish Ottoman prison. And I will just have a short conclusion that the old city reflects urban fabric that was existing during the Ottoman period, whether Ottoman contribution was performed in improvement, addition, alternation, or fully constructed new structure. Still question about contested land by Israeli are reason enough to have separated decision system and conservation approach. As it is pointed out, Israeli are prioritizing archaeological excavation and thus putting heritage since 6th century, including Ottomans, as recent period. Jerusalem image of the city is characterized by the Ottoman contribution and cannot be undermined. There is obvious lack of interest from imposed administration of municipality and thus Israeli government to improve life condition. Taking above mentioned into account, Ottoman heritage is under threat of deterioration and permanent loss of values. So preservation program should be prepared as comprehensive approach along with the education, and Haram al-Sharif is the most important structure of Jerusalem for the Islamic world, and it is a masterpiece. Activities are putting priority in this holy site. Nevertheless, identity of people, its tradition, culture, habits as synergy make spirit of the place as significant element of intangible heritage. So here, by mentioning this, we have to just notice once more and emphasize once more that Jerusalem is a living city, and also this was recognized even by the Jordanian Waqf and later by the welfare organization. They organized some of the rehabilitation activities for the houses of the people, not just the monumental buildings, and in order to keep population in all the cities. So therefore we have to understand that in order to preserve heritage, we have to preserve population to live there, to continue their daily life there. So therefore it's very important to speak also about identity, about tradition, culture. All this is making Jerusalem to be of its outstanding universal values. In order to provide sustainable urban future and structure, proper heritage preservation should encompass tangible and intangible values, integrating social, economic and cultural factors in the process of the urban conservation. So this is, thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's a great pleasure for us in the urban development, Ottoman Period, and the preservation problem, the heritage trust for all of Islamic people. And I mean that in aspect of UNESCO, I asked some people, they speak about Jerusalem, what made UNESCO about the problems of preservation of the old city. Lots of them cannot answer this question, and by this presentation I can find some information about UNESCO's problems, challenges, and the
limitations, constraints.
Limitations. Maybe a few questions for discussing. We have times. Yes,
Ruba, you said that in generally speaking, the Ottoman policy of architecture toward Jerusalem was to preserve the locality of the city. Is it unique to Jerusalem, or it's the same at other part of the areas where Ottomans start to control? For example, let's say when they control another part of their territory, do they start to rebuild the city or change structure completely, or they apply the same rules?
No, actually it was general to the Ottoman strategy that they are tended to enhance and coexist. I mean, unless there was very urgent need for urban changes, they didn't tend to change the urban cardinals of any city. For example, I was showing that in Jerusalem neither population nor these like commercial activities. There were no like need for these changes. But for example, in Aleppo, because there was this like a very development of international and regional commercial trade, there was very urgent need in order to build this like complete commercial center within the city. That's why they tended, maybe to dismantle some Mamluk endowments, like according to the Sharia courts. After that, physically, like destroy these buildings and incorporated like into like new complexes. But otherwise, no, strategy was over like very like tolerant to the previous routes.
In this time, and a preservation plan is in the
under preparation.
Implementation. And after 1999, a report you say us, yes, except of Jewish quarter, another part of holy and old neighborhoods in Jerusalem. It's a very bad position for the city. A new preservation plan and some.
Yes, as far as I know, for instance, for the welfare organization, they are updating information prepared for this plan. But right now there is nothing yet published that I know. But they are preparing, and in the same time they have many actions. They had many actions, like as I mentioned, some of these houses, or what we showed, so like as kind of priority projects. So by project, it is enhancing the condition inside the old city. But of course, for the Jerusalem, it's not sufficient yet. We don't have enough action for the.
So the action plan of UNESCO,
yes, I mentioned action plan. Yes.
It's a very complex.
If you are asking for like domestic, or as Ruba mentioned, like I talk about action plan prepared by the UNESCO, they have, but as I said, like as I mentioned, there was some like also negative comments, but it is very valuable because they also prepared some other documents along, and they had also some of the actions. The similar, like they choose priority projects, and one by one, like they were enhancing and they were like contributing for the preservation of different projects for different religious groups also inside the old city of.
Partial program, not comprehensive.
There is action plan is for the old city, yes, also but it is a comprehensive plan, yes, and they are along this. They have also the manual for the like rehabilitation, and they have chosen priority projects as part of the overall action plan. But since the complex situation, and then for instance we have many threats, we have for instance today we can say that heritage and threats of the archaeological excavation. So for instance they are always reporting about this. They are trying to, I mean, it's not stopped, but they are trying at least to have less negative impact as possible. But of course, as I said, like there are still many questions to be discussed, and in order to have proper action, and then in regard with the like old city of Jerusalem, it's quite complex since it is under municipality of Israeli municipality, and then you have different ownership. So they are very important in terms of decision making, in terms of implementing any project. So you have to also include them, for instance, if the Vakuf, if owners. So and then in the same time, sometimes you have problem that issue should be the permit should be issued by the municipality, but this is. Like a city is under occupation, so this is like another question because the people, they don't want to ask issue from the municipality that occupy the East Jerusalem and the old city. So there is many questions like that are still, but of course again there is a life inside the old city, and we can see another. From other point of view, we can see many positive examples, of course.
Is there difference, the old city and another part of Jerusalem, modern Jerusalem, and managerial difference? Is there one of in Istanbul, for example, in the historical peninsula, there's a presidential of alan yönetimi diyoruz. Alan yönetimi.
Yes, management plan.
District.
Management plan.
Right, yes. But another, for example, Gazi Osman Pasha or Silivri or Beylikdüzü, and municipality has rules about the.
Yes, but for instance, for all action, in all city, Israeli antiquity authorities, they are in charge for everything related to heritage preservation. So you have to take into account all and by the municipality you have prepared master plan, but there is no plan adopted for the old city yet, because it has to be accepted from all sides. And
this is also a challenge. If you want to start any restoration in the city, you have to deal with this Israeli administrative system. So you are accepting this, but people, they don't want to accept this because this is illegal occupation. So this is the challenge. And with all these action plans of UNESCO, they are studying on the technical scale. It's very, very well developed, action plan, but they didn't recognize any of these political conflicts and occupation problems. That's why there is no way to implement such a plan.
There is always some gap in all these documents.
It's possible in Turkish universities, architecture program departments or urban studies, possible to make workshops about the old city. Some of students, or 20 students, goes to Jerusalem.
It is the example I showed. Our students were there. We were dealing. This is.
Of course, the most important thing to have local partner, and this was we were lucky to have our partners, IBCC Center.
Yes, it's published. Yes, we could bring.
Maybe we can send one copy.
To see, we were dealing with the 5 locations, and our partner is actually very valuable there. Otherwise, we cannot work, or you have to have somebody locally. And as I mentioned, if you have partner from West Bank, then you cannot deal inside East Jerusalem and Old City. But if you have somebody locally from the Jerusalem, then it's okay.
You are saying that Russian have influenced architectures like Jerusalem, but if you know in which part of the city
which influence?
For example, you have shown some temples.
Russian.
Yeah, Russian temples. In which part of the city?
It is out. For instance, this maybe you are asking for one of the photos. It is out of the city.
The Russian influence on the architecture in which part of the city?
Yes, it is. For instance, out. I will show you the photos. This is one of the examples, but you can find also by the French group, by the English group.
Each community established their own center in the city.
This, for instance, church. You see the new style of the domes. So therefore, this is implemented by them.
This characteristic Russian style or sometimes Renaissance style, because I saw homes and I saw bridges in Jerusalem. It's some Renaissance style.
Yeah.
But I realized that how can they influence by Renaissance style, because Jerusalem is so isolated.
No, but in that time, if you in that time, with 19th century, this is something increased because the other non-Ottoman citizens, they were allowed to own the land, to own the properties, and in this time we have increased the construction activities of different groups, and all these groups, they were bringing some new styles from different countries. From English group, you have German group, you have from France, and they were bringing these styles, expressing it in architecture, as for instance neo-baroque, neo-renaissance, inside old city, but also outside. So, for instance, this compound is also what I saw on this photo. This is out of the city wall, for instance, and
square in the middle of Jerusalem.
This one.
Just like France is in I went to France and I saw
this was by the Greek. Yes, no, this is not Greek style, but by the patriarch. Yes, but in terms of style, yes, this is something that you can find in Europe, and this was totally in contrast with what was with, for instance, 16th century, what we explained here.
Yani the city was not isolated like in 18th, 19th century. There were many these foreign communities, and after a while, as like Dr. Lana mentioned, the legislation of the Ottoman Empire, they gave them permission in order to buy properties and to start to construct even their like religious buildings, churches and like chapels, everything. So it was not isolated city at all.
They have some religious buildings.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yes, they were constructing, as Mohammed said, like first you have a construction of this religious building, hospitals, schools, but in the same time as we saw many of the neighborhoods on this map were constructed out of the city wall.
You can see communitarian style, for example, communitarian style, because every community has own.
Can be. Like we can use this term for some of these like communities, because I think also for the Russian community they were using like even like architectural drawings, and the complete design was like conducted in Russia by their own architects and just sent to here to be like realized to Jerusalem. Pardon.
Yes, you can find, for instance, in many collection of these photos, the Abdul Hamid collection, or you can Library of Congress. You can find many photos from 19th centuries, and you can see all these different part of the cities, and like to see different style by different groups. Yes.
In terms of letting these communities building their own architect, was it the same under the British mandate? I mean, were they allowed to build their own architect under the British mandate?
Under the British
for
mandate.
example, Armenians or Russian community.
Yes,
they have the same right?
I'm not sure about, like, I cannot say like about detail in terms of, but there was expansion, for instance, from the Jewish communities. They expanded also because there was increased immigration of the Jewish toward Jerusalem also, and like they were
Catholic Orthodox.
Yes, but they were, of course, they were all existing like there, but like I don't know precisely now to tell you which building was.
The whole system changed under the British. Yes, it was completely different from the Ottoman times. So we don't have now enough information to tell if it was exactly as it was in the Ottoman, that everything was permitted. We don't have information.
Most that we know was built under the British mandate.
I don't know, but
Me too. I don't have information actually.
How can we find Jewish architecture? In which terms you can say Jewish combined with style? When I see some photos and shots, I saw that they combine the Renaissance style and the Oriental style.
Yeah.
You can say that?
Eclectical style, yes. This is like very like popular during the late Ottoman period. We can find even here in Istanbul. They started with this eclectical. After that became a new classical to revive the old like classical elements, but in the new like order. And in the provincial cities, we can find also examples in Damascus and Aleppo. We are using eclectical style because you are not like conforming to one style. You are choosing from different period, from different styles, and you are putting in the same building.
Thank you.